Hi everyone. It's great to be here again at another meetup, and I hope we get to have them more often. I'm Barnabé Monnot. I'm a researcher at the Robust Incentives Group. It's a research team at the Ethereum Foundation that works mostly on mechanism design and things that have to do with the economics of the protocol and beyond. So the talk, Economic Organization of Block Building, I've given parts of it previously, so if you've caught some of them, maybe I will say the same thing again, but I hope that you will take some maybe new elements tonight. So first, hi. Just to try and gauge who's in the audience, who knows about the merge? Show of hands. The merge, yeah? Okay. Yeah, okay. Who knows about MEV? Yeah, okay. Who knows about MEV Boost? Right, nice. Who knows about PBS? A bit less. Okay, cool. So yeah, so there's like a general understanding of what I'm going to talk about, but I will try to give a bit more detail and maybe give you a clearer picture of how all of these things sort of fit together. I'm going to start with a bit of definition. Something I've been talking about a lot lately is the idea of principal-agent problem. It's a very common pattern that you see in economic situations. I took the definition from Wikipedia, I'll just read from it. You have a principal-agent problem anytime you have a conflict in interests and priorities that arises when one person or entity, the agent, takes actions on behalf of another person or entity, the principal. The problem is worse when there's a greater discrepancy of interests and information between the principal and the agent, as well as when the principal lacks the means to punish the agent. So incentives, information, punishment, this feels crypto-economic, but we'll get to that part. The deviation from the principal's interest by the agent is called agency costs. So that's one definition. It's, let's say, a formal definition. I got a second one recently at a workshop that we organized at Columbia University, which is that decentralization is a B word. It's really hard because of all these principal agent problems. Whenever you decentralize, you have this situation that, you have to trust someone else to do something on your behalf. And so today, I want to talk about some of these problems, why they appear, and how they kind of fit together in a greater picture. So the first one, PAP number one, is what I call the protocol to proposer problem. Sort of piece. So there's a thing that the Ethereum protocol, it's not really anything tangible. It's more like a specification or a set of rules by which the participants of the Ethereum network are able to communicate with one another. So they all run nodes. The nodes have the client code that is running. They're trying to arrive at this shared single truth of the state of a ledger. That's, let's say, the protocol. But so the ground truth, or let's say the real physical reality, is that there are nodes that are running this. They are the validators. But do they run the protocol honestly, right? The protocol is just a set of rules. Validators could decide to shirk some of these rules and to do something else instead. And so to ensure that the validators run the protocol as the protocol designers meant it to be run, there's a system of rewards and penalties. That's to ensure compliance. But is it enough? And so here we have our first kind of delegation, which is the Ethereum protocol is delegating the mission of running the protocol honestly to a set of validators. Let's talk a bit more about how to become a validator. You have to lock up 32 ETH in the deposit contract. Once you do so, you get activated. As a validator, you're asked to perform some consensus duties on behalf of a protocol. One of them is proposing blocks. So every 12 seconds, a validator is sampled and is asked, okay, can you make a block that contains the latest consensus information as well as an execution payload? And the second duty is attestation. So with attestation, validators are able to come to a single view of the state of a ledger and finalize that view. This is something that's new to proof of stake that didn't exist in proof of work. So if Francesco was here tonight, you would have heard a bit more about that part. Unfortunately, he bailed on us, so you don't get to listen to it, but hopefully next month if we get to do this again. All the best to Francesco. A bit more about the protocol rewards and the penalties. You get a reward whenever you propose a block. That comes from, for instance, the transaction fees in your execution payload, but also the block rewards for the consensus duties. You can also get penalties. So if the protocol figures out that you've done something wrong, For instance, you've been offline for too long, you get inactivity leaked, we call it. And if you do something that's provably malicious, you get slashed. And so with this system of rewards and penalties, we hope that the blockchain that eventually appears as a result of these validators doing their job somehow matches the specification that the protocol was expecting, or at least the outcome that the protocol was expecting. That means a blockchain that's live, a blockchain that doesn't have safety failures, and a blockchain that has as much throughput as possible. This is a plot, I'll come back to it over the course of the talk, what the Ethereum protocol sees, basically. So you have this network of validators. The Ethereum protocol is able to provide rewards and penalties to these validators, but it doesn't entirely see everything that the validators do, right? So there are some rules which validators are somewhat free to apply, or on which there isn't really a consensus on, that the Ethereum protocol doesn't really have a purview to impose these rules. One of them is block building. So there are many ways that block can be made, and we will see over the course of the talk that this has been exploited very heavily in recent years. Before I get to that, I want to talk a bit more about why the blocks are made in the first place, or maybe what's the raison d'être of the Ethereum protocol. And to me, it's really, the protocol is trying to supply network resources. It's trying to provide block space so that users can run dApps and so that transactions can be executed. So this is a very basic slide about the gas. In Ethereum, you have gas to meter how much resources are being used by user transactions. The transactions, they can consume several types of resources. One of them, for instance, is compute. When you run a node and you have a transaction that's incoming, you have to, do maths sometimes when the transaction is adding money to a contract or multiplying something. You have storage consumption. If you need to store in the short-term memory, state accesses or historical data and function calls. And you also have bandwidth, for instance, the size of the block. These are all resources that the network has to expend to run the protocol. So these execution payloads that are in the block, the payloads are just blocks of transactions. They consume gas, which is a single measure of resource use. So even though we have all these different resources, we only have one real measure to compute it, which is gas. And we have a gas limit, which is 30 million. And so now I want to think about the validators, not just as protocol agents that are trying to come to consensus, but also as block producers. So think of it this way, maybe it's a bit of a shift in perspective. The protocol is basically providing validators with some gas. It says, okay, at that slot, you're the person who's going to make the block on my behalf. Here's a bit of gas for you. You're free to get user transactions and to spend that gas by making a block. Okay, and so the validator is really some kind of marketplace that is helping the supply of gas provided by the protocol to meet some kind of user demand for that gas. And what results from that interaction is a block of transaction. So that interaction is not completely unconstrained. First, as I mentioned, there is the gas limit, so you can't borrow as many resources as you want from the protocol. The protocol is trying to rate limit it. But a new constraint we have since now almost 2 years is EIP 1559. So not only do you have a gas limit, but also now the protocol mandates that the transactions have to pay at least a reserve price. That is called the base fee. That reserve price, we've actually done a talk 2 years ago at a Berlin meetup to go a bit more into these details, but that reserve price is dynamically updated based on the demand. And so if we see that the demand for block space is high, we know that we have to raise the price to price out more of the users so that we go back to the target resource use. And if the demand is too low, we decrease the price. So we try to let in more users to use the gas. And so you can think of the reserve price like a congestion price, a bit like Uber. When there's too many people clicking on the app to get an Uber, they say, okay, now the price is rising, and you have to decide if you still want to make that transaction or not. And so that's EIP 1559. More recently, you might have heard something about the multidimensional EIP 1559. So as I was mentioning earlier, the gas is sort of a numeraire. It's like this one stick against which you measure everything else. And so that means, in particular, that you have fixed relative prices between different resources. So for instance, what we're saying today is that, okay, 3 units of execution, of like 3 additions, is kind of the same in terms of resource load as 1 byte of data that is kept by all the nodes forever. It's very hard to make these kinds of ratios. So they were fixed a long time ago in the yellow paper with the gas costs of the different opcodes, but it's very inefficient. In economics, we kind of call that central planning, and we know that it leads to inefficient allocation, where sometimes you have to trade off different units that might be not complementary, that you might be able to substitute, that you might be able to use at the same time. So the idea of moving to a multidimensional gas, so having more dimensions to this market, is that now you can have floating relative prices. And in particular, you can move from this fixed budget constraint, where you have to trade off between resource A, like compute, and resource B, like storage, to a more optimal allocation when you can break out of that constraint and provide more of both. The first instantiation of this multidimensional EIP 1559 is going to be the two-dimensional EIP 1559, something that we call the data gas, and something that will be rolled out with EIP 4844. Show of hand, who has heard of EIP 4844? Yeah, you might know it under the term proto-Danksharding. It's this idea that, okay, now we're moving to this roll-up centric roadmap. So we have these L2s that are able to secure themselves from the Ethereum protocol. What these L2s need to consume as a resource is something that's called data availability. Like, we need to ensure that at some point in time, there's common knowledge of the data that the rollup has been posting, that the data has been made available for everyone to challenge it or to integrate it into their storage. And so that data availability is actually not so difficult in physical terms to provide as a node. You might have to download quite a bit of data, but you don't really need even to store it permanently. So we could, for instance, increase the amount of data availability that is provided without throttling the execution that the nodes are doing. And so if we move to this two-dimensional pricing system, we can let the market figure out how much of the allocation can be done and break and have a more optimal provision of these resources. And so now that's the same plot that was there a couple of slides ago, where the Ethereum protocol gives you not only gas, but it gives you both exec gas, with which you can do the regular execution as you've done it so far, and the data gas that the rollups can consume. And so now you have a new class of users on your network, which is the rollups. And the rollups are coming to validators and they're saying, I want to consume a bit of data gas to secure myself. And again, you have a block that comes out of this interaction. So that was a bit on the background. So yeah, why we do this in the first place, why we care to run a blockchain, why we care to run a protocol. We really want to meet the demand of the users, that can be other infrastructures like rollups, and provide these resources for them as a network. And so now I want to move to the second principal agent problem, which is that in the course of this operation, so in the course of validators making their blocks to meet the demand from users with the supply that is given to them by the protocol, we observed that validators delegate this core function to other parties, other entities that you may know as builders. And so now I want to go a bit more into why that happened. Let's say, why are the economic reasons why we saw this separation take place in the first place, and kind of where we're heading with that. Right, so the Ethereum protocol entrusts the execution, its execution in the hands of validators, but validators outsource some of these functions to the builders. So let's see why. This is more of a historical view. So how was block construction done in proof of work? In proof of work, people would, let's say miners, would be the ones that are making the blocks. They pick transactions from the mempool and they make their block. That's kind of a naive view. A less naive view is to say the miners pick the transactions from the mempool and they organize it in decreasing order of gas price. That, for instance, incentivizes people who really want to get to the top of the block to pay more, a phenomenon that you might know as priority gas auctions. Why this happens is the top of the block is kind of a privileged position for a person that wants to transact. Like, you're the first to act upon the new state of the blockchain. And so if you want to do things like arbitrage or backrunning, it's very profitable for you to have this first slot in the block. And so once miners figured out that, oh, there's actually a real demand for this slot. And the priority gas auctions are a fairly inefficient way at realizing that expression of preferences. Once they figured that out, what happened is an auction system between block proposer and what we call searchers. So searchers are specialized entities that find very valuable transactions that would be very valuable if they were executed first, and try to tell the miner, look, I have this bundle of transactions. If you put it at the top, I will pay you 1 ETH because I will make 1.1 ETH, for instance. And so you have searchers that find these bundles that try to convince the miner to take that bundle and to include it at the top against payment for the miner. And so what we see is a system. It was known as the Flashbots auction. That was the first system that was deployed. It wasn't the only one. There was also Eden before the switch to proof of stake. And so we see that there is this auction between the searchers and the miners. And behind, you have the users still making the transaction. In proof of stake, we had to move to a different system. The auction between the searchers and the miners really worked because there was a fairly strong trust assumption between the miners and the searchers. So the miners were mostly organized under mining pools. The mining pools, you could identify them, they were reputable entities, and so you could kind of create a semi-permission network over which the auction was running. In proof of stake, you have a long tail of solo validators, who are people who are fairly untrusted, so like people running a validator in their living room, and so now you can't really trust them into this semi-permission network. And so the model that was found is to change from a model where you're only telling the miner what to put at the top of their block to just making the whole block on behalf of the block producer. So the block producer in proof of stake is the validator. And so now in that system, you see this supply chain of transaction or of blocks that is getting a little deeper. So you have the users making the transactions, the searchers coupling the transaction in profitable bundles, the bundles being shared with the builders, and then the builders auctioning off their whole block to the validators via what we call the builder API. The economic idea behind this is that if there is a lot of value, for instance, in the bundle, if you find a transaction that has a juicy arbitrage or things that are bad, like sandwiching, you want to try and get that value as far downstream as possible. So it would be, of course, better if the user was getting to recoup it. That's another topic that we can also discuss later. But here the idea is, as long as you have a lot of competition at the searcher layer and at the builder layer, most of the value that these agents are making from doing these profitable arbitrages has to be sent downstream towards the block proposer, okay? Because the searchers are competing to get into the builder blocks, and because the builders are competing to get their block chosen by the validator, they have to give away as much of the value as possible. And so what you see is that the value of these transactions, something that you might know as MEV, flows downstream all the way down to the block proposer. So I think this is a nice mental model. And so what does block building look like today in proof of stake? So in proof of stake, you have two options. You can, of course, do local block building. That means you're running your own mempool. You're listening to the transactions. You're making the blocks yourself when it's your turn to make them. But you can also summon this external block building network that is fairly complex and that summons this external network of builders that connect to you. This network is organized along several layers. So between the builders and the validators, you have this extra layer of what we call relays, which are basically middlemen in this market. So they are brokers. They take the bids from the builders and they validate that the bids are correct. And if the bid is correct and if the proposer has made a commitment to using the bid, the block is then revealed. So think of the relays as brokers of that transaction. There needs to be some kind of trusted escrow in the middle, and that's the role of a relay. A bit of data. This is a plot that I got from mevboost.pix, which tracks the state of that market. Immediately after the merge, already something like 10% of the proposers were signed up to get their blocks done by the external network of builders. Since then, I think today we are very close to 90 to 95% of the blocks made by external builder. That's, I think, quite impressive or significant in the sense that a core function of Validator, or at least something that we could naively think, okay, validators make the block, is actually not really the case today. Most of validators are getting their blocks done by other entities, the builders. At the very beginning, Flashbots, which is the research and development entity that mostly developed the MEV-Boost network, was very dominant over that network from their relay and from their builder. But the share, I guess, has dropped down a little bit with the apparition of new relays, such as ultrasound, block native, or agnostic. The builder market has also had interesting dynamics. At the beginning, we had mostly the vanilla builders, so people who are making the blocks themselves. For people who were not using, for people who were using MEV-Boost, most of them would have their blocks made by the Flashbots builder. But since then, there's been quite a few more builders that are now very competitive and that are contesting this market against one another, like builder OX69, Beaver Build, or Manta Builder. Their names are always funny to say, especially when you're giving like a serious conference. Okay, but what are the risks? So why do validators do this in the first place, right? They expect to get more money because you have these specialized entities, the builders, that are supposed to know how to make blocks better. They're supposed to return to you more value than you could make as if you were making the blocks by yourself. But that also means that you have risks, right? Whenever you delegate things to someone else, they might not do the thing that you want them to do. And in particular, one risk, and something that was very discussed in the recent months, is the idea of censorship resistance. So by definition, the Ethereum protocol wants you to include a transaction as long as it pays the fee, especially with EIP 1559. If your transaction is willing to pay at least the base fee, and if there's room in the block, you should be included. That's kind of the, let's say, rationale to have a neutral or credibly neutral protocol. So the protocol proposer problem told you that, individual proposer might sometimes censor transactions. Let's say I have personal preferences. I don't want to include Kaspar's transaction for some reason. But because the validator set is expected to be very decentralized, Kaspar knows that even if his transaction is not included by me, he might get in the next proposer's block, because you have many, many different types of proposers in your validator set. But once proposers outsource the production of their block to entities like builders, which are much more centralized, if you remember the plot I was showing you, you could count on two hands how many big builders you have in the market. So once you have this outsourcing, you might have a problem, right? Some builders might decide, well, actually, I don't want to include your transaction. So builders or relays, they might be, for instance, registered entities. They might have concerns, legal concerns around the inclusion of certain transactions. And then if most of your network is sourcing blocks from these builders or these relays, you might find that some transactions are just not going through in your network. So in Ethereum, it was always the case that transactions would eventually be getting in, but that means, for instance, if your transaction hurts someone's concern, you might have to wait a little longer to get in. This is really an agency cost in the sense of this principal agent problem. I pay a cost as someone who delegates from the agent not seeing eye to eye with my own preferences. And so the solution is, for instance, the proposer could give a hint to the builder, could tell the builder, look, I really want this transaction to go through, so either put that transaction in your block or you can't build the block for me. This is something that's known as inclusion lists. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it's something that's been discussed, possibly, for instance, for inclusion into the protocol. This is a recent plot on this censorship. So someone was tracking how many blocks were called OFAC compliant, so how many blocks or how many builders and relays were declaring themselves to be compliant with the OFAC regulation. It's been going down in recent times, so I got that today. It seems like 45% of the builders are enforcing OFAC compliance, which means that on average, if you're sending a transaction that is violating this list, you might have to wait an extra block to get in. So in terms of waiting time, it's not so bad, but you do have half of a network that is enforcing that. Okay, I have 5 minutes left. So I just wanted to end a bit on, let's say, widening the frame. How do all these things fit into where the protocol is headed? What other principal agent problems exist that we might be curious to take a look at? So one of them is, okay, PBS is today expressed out of protocol, so via this MEF-boost network. And I told you the relays, they are trusted parties, they validate the goods sold, which is the block, they act as brokers. But is this enough, right? As a protocol, we see this happen, and this is all happening outside of the view of the Ethereum protocol. All this network is not something that the protocol knows anything about, but should it, right? If this is so systemic to the network, is there a point at which we decide, okay, we need to do something about it, and maybe move some of that infrastructure into the protocol? And so the idea is really the idea of boundaries. So given that now we have this new network of builders to which validators are delegating the function of making the block, well, should we metaphorically extend the boundary of a protocol so that we have some kind of control over the builder? Maybe even some kind of system of rewards and penalties, or enshrining some of the dynamics of this market into the core Ethereum protocol. So that's something that has been quite discussed recently. Another question is, there are much more principal agent problems out there. So you have the one up here on the right, that's the network of builders. That network itself is becoming more complicated. So you might have heard about Suave from Flashbots. There are many other proposals to do things like payment for order flow or wallet side auctions, such things. It's getting much more deeper on that side. So that's one of the principal agent problem. Another type of principal agent problem is, for instance, liquid staking. So you have stakers that don't stake at home, don't stake directly themselves. They give their tokens to a pool, and the pool gives them back a liquid staking token. And so then you have some part of the network of validators that's not really controlled by the validators who are running your network, but that are controlled rather by the token holders of this liquid staking derivative. That might induce some of these delegation problems once again. A new type of delegation problem that, yeah, if you are on Twitter, it's been also quite discussed. They released their white paper a couple of days ago, is eigenlayer. So the idea that stakers can restake their capital, their ETH, to perform additional services. And so they sign up to this eigenlayer system. They allow themselves to be slashed by conditions that the Ethereum protocol is not enforcing, but that other agents are enforcing. And they might get extra rewards, but there's also extra risk. And so now you might have a misalignment between what the Ethereum protocol expects of its validators and what eigenlayer expects of the same set of people. So all of these principal agent problems are popping up, and I think it'd be very interesting to have a more coherent view of that scene. And I wanted to, I made that slide just like a couple of hours ago after reading the Base announcement from Coinbase. Another type of infrastructure that exists and that wasn't pictured here is the rollups. The rollups are L2 chains. They pay their data availability fees to validators who provide the data gas for them. In exchange, the validators are securing them. So the rollups are, in a sense, delegating their security to the validators. And they are also deeply embedded in that web of infrastructure. So some of the rollups might get their blocks or batches built by the builders. Eigenlayer has plans to release something called EigenDA, which would provide data availability to the rollups. I couldn't make the arrow because then the plot would be too busy. But yeah, what I'm saying here is that the economic landscape of Ethereum is becoming much more complex, and I think it's worth taking time to understand how these relationships work, how they evolve as well, and what's really the role of the Ethereum protocol in that system. And I know I sound a bit like the "it's always sunny" meme, but yeah, I really think this is important, and it's happening very quickly, and I want us all to pay attention to that. Thank you for listening. I have more notes on a post on Substack, and you can also find me on Twitter.
thank you for the talk. It was very nice. At DevCon, I felt like it was a bit of a elephant in the room. Do we feel now like it's okay?
What is okay?
I'll have a microphone back.
Okay. So let's see. Oh, there's no time on this. I think DevCon was like here. I don't know. I remember somebody posting that chart, but it was much on a shorter time frame, and it was just like all increasing the red band. And so at that point, I guess people were like, okay, this is something terrible is happening, and it doesn't seem like it's stopping anytime soon. It is true that it got better. I don't think we can say, okay, it's victory, like we've defeated that. So that's why people are talking about in-protocol PBS. That's why people are talking about inclusion lists. So there is still a lot of thought that's given to, okay, how do we harden the network against these types of things? How do we realign the incentives between the builders and the proposers and the protocol? So in my opinion, we are getting stronger, not weaker. And not just stronger in the sense of, okay, the market of MEV-Boost is diversifying, becoming more healthier, becoming more contested, which is good, but also stronger in the research that we have and the kind of tools that we know are available to us, and also maybe the trade-offs that these tools have. So there's still a lot to go, but I would say, overall, I'm fairly confident that we can get something nice. Yay.
So you talked about expanding the protocol to the basically maybe prescribing how blocks should be built. Can you give some examples on how that should be designed or would be designed?
Right. So I guess I don't know that we'll expand the protocol all the way to how the blocks should be built. There are protocols out there that are much more prescriptive about this. For instance, you might have heard about this idea of fair ordering or receive time ordering. So protocol like Equitas, Themis, they try to come to consensus over when did the transaction appear. They're basically trying to do first come, first serve, but in a decentralized setting where you don't have like these weird incentives to game the queue, let's say. I'm not sure we'll ever see that in Ethereum. I think we care for a bit more generality. It does seem like it works well for certain designs, but for instance, these protocols also seem like they could induce latency wars and over-optimization of, basically latency. And so, in my opinion, the block ordering will remain fairly unspecified at the protocol level. But what we could see is in protocol PBS, which is basically getting rid of that layer of relays and getting rid of MEV-Boost and moving parts of that into the protocol. So running the auction of the builder and proposers, but where the auctioneer is no longer this out-of-protocol system, but the protocol itself, which could harden the thing a bit more. So something else that was, maybe I'm just riffing on this, but something that was discussed was the idea of encryption at the base layer. So shutterized beacon chain, which Gnosis chain is exploring very actively. It was actually a proposal from, Shutter. But so I'm not sure that we will see that at the base layer either, though there is a lot of research on the idea of encrypted mempools and trying to get encrypted transaction to execute eventually. But I'm not sure what it will look like in the future.
Thanks, Barnabé. Just one question. You mentioned shortly I think EIP 4844. I always get the number wrong. Well, if rollups are like a thing to stay, and then maybe some people or like some users have a choice where basically they execute the transaction. So doesn't that mean that most problems that you talked now, they will be obsolete?
Yeah, that's a good question. But I think rollups will have the exact same problems. They're already building their sequencer, so the people who are making the blocks on the rollups, to be decentralized. And that means your sequencer could be a builder. So for instance, if I want to execute a transaction that does a cross-chain arbitrage between, let's say, Optimism and the Ethereum L1 or Optimism and Cosmos or something, and if I know that there's a builder which is making blocks on both sides, it could be advantageous for that builder to sit in the middle and make blocks for both domains. And so all of these problems of delegation of block construction, we could see them appear also at the rollup level.
But could not Ethereum decide themselves, like how much data availability they allocate to certain rollups? If certain rollups are like more fair and others are maybe more bribable, I don't know how to say that.
I think this would be very hard. Again, with the idea of, let's say, fuzzy idea of credible neutrality, unless you had like a credible signal that told you, okay, this rollup is not playing fair, I think it would be very difficult to get that signal. But even if you did get that signal, I'm not sure you would see that in protocol, like some kind of rate limiting of people we don't like.
Thank you. So when EIP 4844? When?
Soon, TM. I actually don't know. I haven't been following the development so much. Yeah. Coinbase said summer of 2023, so they're making the roadmap for us now.
Hey, well, first of all, thank you so much for the talk. It was amazing. I have one question. If you had to pick one, what would you say would be the biggest initiative that we could take to systemically improve security in the Ethereum ecosystem?
Oh, that's a tough question.
So it's just like, basically I went to law school and now blockchain is my life. And I'm just really interested in cybersecurity because I tasted every flavor of the blockchain, so to speak, from artists to real estate agents.
Yeah.
And I figured the way to stay in touch with all of them is to protect the infrastructure that they're operating on. And, Ethereum is obviously the best blockchain. So I was wondering how we could do that, how we could keep the city safe.
I see. So, I guess security is like very multidimensional. So people say, for instance, okay, node count. You want to increase the node count because if you have more full nodes, your blockchain is more secure. I think that's part of it. Another part is we could be maybe a bit more explicit about the kind of failure modes that we, as a community, would say, okay, this is a hard no for us. So for instance, with proof of stake, you have the ability to fork people who don't play fair. So if you have like something like a 50% attack or 67% attack in proof of stake, you have the ability to take the attackers out and reboot your network from there. It's been discussed as, okay, there is the possibility to recover from these attacks if they ever happen. They don't depend only on the node count. They depend really on some kind of strategic planning to some extent by the community to say, okay, if we have a set of validators that are constantly censoring, what do we do? If we have a set of validators that are throttling the chain so that they can extract monopoly pricing from the users, what do we do? All of these types of questions, I actually know that some people are thinking about them like from a legal perspective, and I could share some links with you if you're interested. But they do get to the essence of what are the kind of properties you can guarantee, let's say, economically or cryptographically from your protocol, and what kind of guarantees do you have to just say, when it gets to that point, some layer has to kick in, some kind of social layer or some kind of community layer. And when it does, how do we recover from the attack? Like, how do we reboot the chain and what does it look like? So maybe preparing a bit better for these contingencies could be something that hardens the security, and maybe defining the cases where we think this is important to do. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It does, but how would you say that to someone who just installed their MetaMask? You know what I mean?
You mean like that? So to them, I would say, don't share your seed phrase. So okay, from the user side, there's a couple of things, like more light clients would be nice, for instance. So having the ability to not be trapped into the MetaMask default RPC, that's one thing. Another thing that's more like in the economic realm, I was discussing, okay, MEV flows from the user to the proposer, basically. But some of that MEV, especially when it comes to things like sandwiching, I don't know. I mean, the user shouldn't be losing it in the first place. And so if you find protocols or mechanisms that allow the user to protect themselves against unfair extraction of the value that they provide to the network, I think that will go a long way to making the network a bit more fair and secure from the user perspective.
Well, thank you.
Sure.
All right.
Hi, Carl.
Hey, Barnabé, long time no chat. So for the idea of inclusion lists, we talk about like forcibly, you force people to, you force builders to include your transactions in a block. And this is a preference that you as a validator may have. Do you foresee there being a market for this from the perspective of like there is a value at which I wish to express that? Like I would be prepared to give up a fraction of an ETH for this, but if it's going to cost me 0.1 of an ETH, then that might be something I'm more interested in. And if that is the case, like if we do see these happening, does this not bring back like being able to bribe your way back into censorship again by repeatedly paying for these things to occur?
Yeah, good question. So I can answer it from two perspectives. The first one is what you're describing is kind of there in MEVBoost already. There's this new option when you're running MEVBoost that says basically the mean bid that you have to be paid. So you're saying, I'm willing to get a block made on my behalf by a builder if the block returns me at least this value. So something that people running MEVBoost really want is, okay, sometimes you have like extremely juicy MEV blocks and you just don't want to lose out on them. But these are fairly rare. Like the MEV distribution is heavily long-tailed. So most of the blocks don't return to you a lot of MEV compared to the default block that you're making yourself. And so you can see already that, yes, some proposers are making that trade-off between, okay, there's a toggle, let's say, between efficiency, so how much value they're getting, and censorship. So yeah, that's one way of seeing that people would be willing to make that trade-off. A second thing is, you don't necessarily, there's a model of inclusion list where you don't have to make that choice yourself. The model of inclusion list where the protocol enforces it, where you make the list not for yourself, but for the next guy. And so, yeah, now for you, it's costless to make the list. I think we need to think a bit more about this because it will be the first time in the protocol that you can, as a proposer, enforce constraints on the next proposer. So these constraints are supposed to be free, but my intuition is that there may be some attack vectors here. But yeah, this is more of a thought at this point.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, maybe answering one last question.
Sure.
What's the biggest threat to Ethereum?
Oh, these are good questions. Wow. Well, MEV is pretty threatening. I mean, it's threatening in the sense that it got so big so quickly, and it made so many people basically froth at the lips, like, oh, there's all this dollar amount that I can be making as a searcher, as a builder, as a relay, as a proposer. I think if we don't find good ways to contain it, that could pollute the protocol fairly heavily. So the idea that users feel like when they're sending a transaction on Ethereum, they're not being executed fairly, if it's a swap or if it's something else. The idea that proposers are, okay, you put up some stake and then you're just getting all these extra rewards from basically doing nothing, just running MEVBoost. So yeah, that to me feels like it could make people feel like transacting and securing Ethereum is, it's like the game is just not fair. That to me is quite threatening. I hope that answered your question. Okay.
All right. Let's have a short break of 10 minutes. Thanks again.
Thank you.